Good morning. My name is Barbara Barrett. I am the Executive Director of the Frontier Duty Free Association, representing Canadian land border duty free stores, small, independently owned, local export businesses from across Canada that are an integral part of our border communities and the tourism industry in Canada. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that this press conference is taking place on unceded Indigenous lands. Our communities are historically known as gathering places for many First Nations, and today they are home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within our communities. I welcome and thank you all for being here today. At FDFA, we understand the broad and substantial impact that the land border closure had on all Canadians, and most specifically on border communities. But I would like to underscore the plight of our land border duty-free stores that rely 100% on cross-border travel. All Canadian businesses were hit hard by the pandemic. However, when the Prime Minister and the White House closed the Canada-US land border for 20 months, our locally owned stores were the hardest hit of the hardest hit businesses in Canada. Our stores were 95% down in sales during this historic border closure. By law, our stores could not shift to domestic or online sales. Despite the fact that our stores were shuttered to protect Canadians, many federal government relief measures did not fit our federally regulated structure. And all of this while airplanes were allowed to fly over the border. Today, FDFA released an economic analysis showing land border duty-free sales remained down an average of 33% compared to pre-pandemic as of the July Canadian and American holidays, which are business indicators for the summer and the most important season for our businesses. It is unreasonable for the government that put our stores in the position of requiring the debt to expect repayment when the stores have yet to recover from the long-lasting impact of the government's handling of the border. We did our part to keep Canadians safe at the land border, and it seems a moral imperative for the federal government to acknowledge that and forgive our stores the CEBA loan. The border was only truly opened as of May 11th, 2023, when the U.S. dropped its requirement for the proof of vaccination to enter. In addition, continued restrictions caused a change in rubber tire traffic over the border, an issue that the new Minister of Tourism must address. Our stores had no way to pivot business during the border closure, and we continue to bear the brunt of these long-lasting impacts. We are asking for fairness from the government. We are asking for, at the very least, CEBA loan forgiveness. We are also asking for a financial support package to see our hardest hit businesses through until the land border travel returns to normal. Again, we see this as a moral obligation to assist the businesses that fell through the cracks in a number of financial relief programs and were absolutely the hardest hit. Border communities and border businesses have been disproportionately affected by the border closure and subsequent restrictions. While life returned to normal everywhere else, government regulations prevented border communities from resuming their way of life and economic base. Thank you, and I'll take any questions you might have.
If you have any question in your online, please use the raise hand function to notify us of the question. Si vous êtes en ligne, vous avez une question, utilisez la fonction lever la main pour nous avertir de votre question. Première question, Valérie Michaela Baines, Radio-Canada. Go ahead.
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que vous parlez français?
In petit peu, but not very well. I apologize.
Would you want to try out answering a question in French, or is that too much?
I wouldn't do it well, so I'd rather not, if you don't mind. I apologize.
Okay.
Thank you.
So sorry, I kind of missed a little bit of the beginning of what you said. So what is your expectation today?
We are asking the government for CEBA loan forgiveness. I know a number of groups are asking for extension for repayment, but we're asking for full forgiveness. Again, we haven't started our recovery. We just started our recovery as of about May 11th of 2023 when the restrictions dropped in the U.S. It seems unfair when we were so disproportionately affected by the 20-month border closure for them to expect repayment.
How much does it amount to?
There was a $20,000 forgiveness of a $60,000 loan, so there's $40,000 remaining.
What are your members telling you?
Our members are telling us that they're still across the board, they're 33% down compared to pre-pandemic, that the rubber tire traffic has decreased and hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels. Habits changed over the pandemic, and that we as a whole need to work on returning that rubber tire traffic back to what it was.
Next.
I mean, what you're asking me is quite obvious, but I'm trying to get like specific examples. Who have you spoken to that's told you their stories and what it means to them, the impact the pandemic and like this loan
Sure.
and having to pay it back has had on them?
Sure. As I mentioned, because we are we're so niche, we're a highly regulated business. We fell through the cracks of a number of the relief programs, so a lot of the stores had to take on debt, a personal debt, and otherwise just to keep their businesses going. I'm not sure what other industry could be expected to be closed for 20 months. And be expected to survive without taking on debt. So given that, and given that we haven't returned to normal, it seems it seems only fair that we don't have to repay that CEBA loan.
How many members? Go ahead.
Go ahead. And and they're in this position not because of not because their business isn't viable. It's a very viable business. It's been part of the tourism fabric of Canada for over 30 years, and it's not because they made any bad business decisions. They're in this position because the government closed the border for 20 months and then had subsequent restrictions. And we are 100% reliant on that border being open, as we are an export-only business.
How many members do you represent?
32 land border duty-free stores across Canada.
If the government doesn't hear what you're asking, well, what are the consequences going to be, you think?
Unfortunately, I think we will see some stores not be able to survive.
I have
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have another question from Kate McKenna, CBC.
Thank you.
Go
Good
ahead.
morning. Just to build on Valerie.
Sorry, Kate. That's go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes?
Okay, great. Just to build on Valerie McKenna's question, how frustrated are your members right now?
You know, they are frustrated. We were willing to do our part to keep Canadians safe when the border closed. We understood that we had to do that. But as it lingered on and as restrictions stayed on, it seemed like we were really being disproportionately affected. And then once the restrictions dropped, only as of May 11th this year, we were really hoping to see the floodgates of Americans and Canadians going over the border, and that's just not what's happening. And it's less frustrated and more disheartening. These are.
You mentioned that they're. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say these are family-run, locally owned businesses that they've been running these in their families for over 30 years, and it's very disheartening when you see it struggling so much and maybe not survive.
Well, on that note, you mentioned that traffic continues to be considerably down. Are you asking for any regulatory changes in addition to this loan possibly being forgiven?
We're asking for the new tourism minister to look at ways to get that to get Americans back coming over the border the way that they were. We're asking for us to be recognized as an export industry that depends on the border. For its business, so that when things like this happen again, we're taken into, or if something like this happens again, that we are taken into consideration and not left behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other question? Oh, Richard Raycraft, CBC News, go ahead.
Hi there. Just to follow up on what some of my colleagues were asking, you mentioned that border traffic is down. I was wondering, is that pretty much uniform across the border, or are there some border crossings and duty-free stores that have been hit harder than others?
Certainly, some are recovering faster than others, and traffic has increased more at some than others. We're finding that some of the more remote areas, both in the east and the further west of Canada, are finding it more difficult to recover, and the traffic is slower to recover in those areas. The more remote, the more difficult it is.
And I was just wondering, are you anticipating that things will pick up at some point in the future, and when?
I mean, we were certainly hoping that once the May 11th deadline came for the requirements of travelers to have vaccination, proof of vaccination going into the U.S., that things would have recovered at that moment. The July long weekends, both the July 4th, the American holiday, and the Canada Day long weekends, are indicators usually of how the summer is, which is our high season, is going to roll out. And unfortunately, we still saw during that time period that they were still 33% down on average across the board. So unfortunately, that is what we're looking at probably for the summer.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And we have no more questions, so this concludes the press conference. Thank you very much.